When Ray Hartjen was diagnosed with multiple myeloma cancer, it was the first thing he thought about when he woke up in the morning, and pretty much the last thing he thought about before he nodded off to sleep every night. It occupied his thoughts most of the day. I've got cancer. Those were the words that plagued him. To snap out of it, he asked himself what type of role model he wanted to be for his family, his friends, and his community. What would be his legacy? This is just part of what we're going to talk about today with Ray, and I look forward to hearing his story and how many of you listening, will be relating. We'll be right back.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Ray is a writer and musician whose professional career has spanned parts of 5 decades. Ray has pivoted on many occasions from investment banking, wow, that's quite the switch, to pharmaceuticals, from consumer electronics to software. One constant throughout his career path has been storytelling. And I love stories, as I'm sure all of you do. And his topics are as far ranging as sports to business. This is going to be exciting. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's wonderful to be on Never Give Up Hope, and thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm appreciative.
Well, tell us your story first of all, and then how your diagnosis, if it did, come as a surprise, and how you reacted. So start from the beginning.
Yeah, I had lived a life of good health, Carol, and kind of in a bubble that way. I've been blessed
Right.
that way, and I hadn't had serious illnesses in my family and the like. So I was kind of living in my protective little bubble. I kind of look at myself as like the classic bell-shaped curve, and I'm right there with everybody else. Thankfully. And, all that changed for me, very introspectively, too, in March of 2019. And that's when I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, which, for those of you in the audience who might not be familiar with it, it's a relatively rare blood cancer. It's an incurable blood cancer. Yeah,
really?
at the same time, it's treatable. You asked a question, did it come as a surprise? Yes and no. I had a routine blood test that came back and showed me slightly anemic. And by getting to the root cause of that anemia, first of all, we had to confirm that anemia. And sure enough, I was anemic in the confirmation test. In fact, even a little more so. And then, it was, okay, you are anemic. Let's try to find out what the root causes are. And so that led to a series of more sophisticated blood tests. We were when you said, was it a surprise? Kind of yes and no. My hematologist, which I discovered, almost every hematologist is a hematologist / oncologist, right? So that was the first time, when I was referred to a specialist, I'm like, oh, wow, hematologist, oncologist, this might be something. And as we were going down more and more sophisticated tests, she gave my wife Lori and I a bit of a preview, saying, I don't know what this is yet, but it could be lymphoma or it could be multiple myeloma. Either way, it was something that ended in an A probably, and something fairly sinister at that. And ultimately, the final definitive test was a bone marrow biopsy, and that came back. Interestingly enough, came back and showed 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous. And
What?
one of the things I really like to stress to people when I talk, when I was first diagnosed, people asked me, Carol, what can we do for you? What can we do for you?
Right, right.
I felt good. And I didn't need the help. I recognized over time that sometimes people need help. I don't need the assistance, but they need to provide. People, a great many of us like to be in control. And when someone that you love and and cherish and so forth, is suffering, it's like they feel out of control. So I had to learn how to accept help. But as I kept answering that question of what can you do for me, it developed into a series of 4 things that I like to tell people. And I always say this when I'm public speaking, and in particular when I'm raising funds for cancer patient advocacy. The first thing to do that you can do for me is go see your doctor. Go see him at least annually. Make sure you have a routine blood test. And I tell my story about that. A routine blood test led to the discovery and the diagnosis of multiple myeloma, the discovery that 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous. And Carol, I felt fine.
That's unbelievable.
I felt as though I was in good health. And
Huh.
I looking back at things now, I can recognize the fact that perhaps I was a bit fatigued, but give me a break. I was 54 years old, married, full-time job, 2 kids in expensive private universities. I think I earned the right to be a little fatigued, right? I consider myself, and my doctors consider myself, even with 90% bone marrow cancers, to be an early detection, because a great many multiple myeloma patients get diagnosed by suffering unexplainable bone fractures. Many times it's compression fractures in their vertebrae. You just wake up in the morning, take a couple of steps out of bed, and suffer multiple compression fractures of your vertebrae. And then, trying to figure out why that happened leads to the diagnosis of multiple myeloma. Despite the fact that 90% of my bone marrow was cancerous, I didn't have any bone lesions. So it was early detection for me. And as I tell people, go visit your doctor, because if you go visit your doctor, you can, hopefully be detected early of any type of, health concern. And treatment with early detection is so much easier, so much more effective than late detection, right? So go see your doctor. And then quickly, the other 3 things, that I've learned to say to people when they ask what you can do for me. Number 2 is mitigate your risk factors. And I call them the 2s, Carol. You don't need a doctor to tell you what they are. You kind of already know what they are. They're things like you smoke too much, you drink too much, you eat too few fruits and vegetables, you exercise too little, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Mitigate your risk factors as best you can. The third thing, if you know somebody going through a serious health issue, particularly if they're going through it alone, reach out and offer your help. It is a daunting prospect, to face a serious health injury, a health concern. I talk about just the correspondence that Lori and I get in the mail. We've got, insurance payers. We've got care practitioners. We've got pharmaceutical companies. It's just inundated with just correspondence alone. It is tough to navigate a serious health issue. If you know somebody doing it alone, reach out and offer some help. And then the 4th and final thing is find your passion in life and pursue it, and provide your money and or your time to that passion, because we are all in this together. We all get something, and together we are stronger than we know. So go out there and make a difference wherever you feel as though you can make a difference and what's most important to you. But get back to answering your question. Long story short, it was it was a surprise, in a way, but also we were kind of led, as we're going down the process of diagnosis, begin to narrow down the options, and they weren't very good options. I was always looking for that old, Monty Hall, let's make a deal. How about I haven't been presented door 3 yet. Door 1 was lymphoma. Door 2 is multiple myeloma. Is door 3 like, a vacation in Tahiti? Because I want that one.
You mentioned about reaching out to people and those who reached out to you. Many times I think that people are shy to do that because they don't, first of all, the person that it's happening to, they don't want others to know.
Yeah.
And, they want to be secretive, whatever. And another thing is, I find that people sometimes don't want to be around you if they know that you have a problem. how do you navigate those situations, or did you have to?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's very difficult I found it very difficult to share my diagnosis. I didn't have to share it with my wife. My wife Lori accompanied me to all of my doctor appointments, and we went down this journey together. So that I didn't
Mhm.
I avoided a very difficult conversation there, but that I had to let my family know. I thought that's what I wanted to do, and I wish I had practiced the conversations ahead of time.
Oh, okay.
I just went at it. It's like, well, my daughter's in law school at Vanderbilt in Nashville. She's the most eastern of us. We live in California, so knowing that as soon as I started spreading the news, it would spread back channel as well. So let's start with her in the in the Eastern time zone. And so I give her a call, and while we were in contact a lot via text messages and things like that, we didn't talk a lot on the telephone, and so here she gets this call and she's like, oh, she automatically thinks something's wrong. I think
Of
she might have
course.
been tearing up even before she said hello, and having not rehearsed it, it was an incredibly difficult conversation. And it got easier as I worked my way, west in the time zone and talked to family members. And the decision to tell dear friends and that it's like I've always been an open book on things, so I told people. But it's interesting. You talked about every patient makes a decision on how open and public they are about their health concerns. And for me, it wasn't much of a concern. But one thing I found kind of concerning was in my patient support group, I kept hearing things from patients, and one of them was like, you find out who your friends are really fast. And
Right.
and that struck me. I hope I never say that.
Mm.
I and I know it's happened to people, and I have had relationships change, I think, a little bit because of my diagnosis. But
Mhm.
there's I like to counsel patients into like give your friends a bit of a break. And I use myself as an example. For years I avoided difficult conversations. And an example I'll give is there was a party at my house once, and I'm talking to a woman, and another friend of ours comes up and asks the first woman when she's expecting. And it's really awkward because she wasn't expecting at all. And it's that classic like awkward conversation. I wasn't even a participant. I just observed it, and I was like, oh. And so I never wanted to put myself in that position, so I would
Right.
never have these meaningful conversations with people because I was afraid of saying something wrong, afraid of being in a tough conversation. I once
Hmm.
asked a friend of mine, Therese, where her husband Tracy was at a party, and she just looked at me and kind of smiled and said, "Not here." And I felt like, oh no, they're breaking.
Oh dear.
And I felt awkward. So what I did in response, Carol? I didn't ask anybody about any significant others. I let
Mm.
them bring up the topic first. And I missed out on all these conversations. So
Right.
what I try to tell people is that, if you discover like a friend of yours, is suffering from a severe medical diagnosis, maybe they don't know what to say. And
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
counsel to those people is start there. Like this is my friend Carol. I love her. I care for her. Carol, I don't
Mhm.
know what to say, but I'm hoping that
Right.
you can help guide me through this difficult conversation for 30 seconds, not long, until we can get to some way that, we can
Mhm.
work this
Mhm.
forward. So I do like to counsel, both friends and family, but also the patients that communication is a two-way street. It takes two to tango, as the cliche goes. And we all have our reservoirs of knowledge, skills, experience, and values. And that's how we kind of, if I have a thought in my head, Carol, and I'm trying to convey it to you, I use that reservoir of knowledge, skills, experience, and values to code a message. The words that I choose, the intonation in my voice, the inflection in my voice, my nonverbal gestures, it all makes sense to me based on
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
filters, right? And then I shoot it over to you, and then you have to decode that message using your
Right.
reservoir of knowledge, skills, experience, and values, and try to interpret, the meaning that I have and the way that I choose to communicate to you. And a lot of times those, they don't match up because our reservoirs of knowledge, skills, experience, and values are frequently different, right? Just eye contact, for example. Some people value eye contact.
Right.
Some people value indirect eye contact. So that's just one, little example. So it's a very dynamic process. If you feel as though you're out there and you're kind of like, losing relationships, what are you going to, if they're important to you, what are you going to do proactively and accountably to get through this tough area? Your friends are your friends for a reason,
Right.
and they're too valuable to not work hard at keeping them. Maybe you might have to give it a little bit more before you can take some from that relationship. But if the relationship's important to you, I think you should go ahead and do that.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
So fast forward a little bit and tell us what happened.
Yeah, it's as you said in the introduction, when I was first diagnosed, it's like, wow, I have cancer. And like you said, pretty much the first thought I had in the morning, pretty much the last thought I had at night. I drifted off to sleep. And being the classic overachiever, I was going to be the best cancer patient ever. And so I had induction therapy for my multiple myeloma that was going to lead probably to a stem cell transplant in 3 to 6 months. I was like, fantastic. I want to do this stem cell transplant in 3 months. And I'm going to be in great physical shape for this stem cell transplant. And I'm going to, eat well and, blah, 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 blah. And I approached it, Carol, like I approached a lot of things in everything in my life up to that point in time, whether it be athletically, professionally, academically, musically. There's always some sort of capstone event, and there was, like an exam in school or, a deliverable at work, a concert musically, a race or something, and a game, athletically. About a week and a half into my journey with cancer, my fight against cancer, I'm sitting at a restaurant with Lori and our son, Raymond, and I'm exhausted. I couldn't even read the menu. We were at a P.F. Chang's. I remember that. I'm just sitting in their chair, and big sigh, and like, wow, I am beat. And, it was there that I, discovered my whole being, and, my whole being was much more than just my physical being. I was able to recognize that, my whole being is my physical being, but it's also my emotional and mental and spiritual well-being as well. And, as a musician, I kind of familiar with the mixing board, and as a guitar player, more guitar, and less everybody else. But, I realized that, with those 4 components, what I like to simplify is the 4 components of my whole being: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. If one of those are strong, they can maybe lift up some other areas that might be weak. Conversely, if, one or more are suffering really poorly, maybe they might drag down the others. And, I was really focused on my physical health, and, I to the detriment of my, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. And those were dragging me down. I was exhausted, but it wasn't, manifested itself as mental exhaustion. It was really as physical exhaustion, but it was really mentally driven, mentally exhausted. So, when I was able to kind of articulate that in my head, I'm like a week and a half in. I think I was diagnosed like on a Monday or Tuesday, and this was like the next Friday. And I thought, wow, I just learned something about myself. And I thought, what if, what else can I learn from this diagnosis about myself? I wanted to approach it, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but, with a growth mindset, as children, Carol, we go out into the world with this sense of wonderment and discovery. And it's not even with intent and on purpose. It's just that we haven't experienced much as kids. And so we go out there and we just learn, like, remember those days, like a summer break when you're like 6 years old, and you just, after breakfast, you go outside and you just learn, but you discover right? But something happens to us as humans. I think it's kind of like our human condition is, once we get to be a teenager, we know everything. And I know this is an audio a podcast, but I'm using little air quotes. I know everything. I'm a teenager, and sometimes we kind of lock that down. That kind of goes a long way. And, we end up learning things, but they're kind of like hard lessons learned. And so I'm like, what else can I learn from this? And one of the things that I immediately like drew my attention, I'm not sure why, it just popped in my head. It's a timeline exercise that I used to facilitate as a facilitator of time management courses. This is an exercise that's part of a Franklin Covey course. It's called different things throughout the years, but I think when I taught it was called What Matters Most. And this timeline exercise, I just like all of us to run through this right now. You, Carol, the whole audience. Just mentally, if you don't have a pencil and paper handy, draw a horizontal line from left to right. And then at the far left-hand side where you started that horizontal line, make a little vertical tick mark. And at the far right-hand side of that line, make another vertical tick mark. So you've taken a line and made it mathematically into a segment. And then on the left-hand side, underneath that tick mark, you write the letter B, and that's going to stand for your birth. And then because you're already one step ahead of me, everyone, on the right-hand side, put the letter D, and that represents your death. So the introspective part of this exercise is, we all know intellectually that tomorrow's not promised, but where do you feel you are on your timeline?
Good question.
Yeah. And so, for years, Carol, I just, like haphazardly, as I'm facilitating this for other people in the course, I would just throw my tick mark right in the middle, because Carol, I was going to live forever, and if it wasn't forever, it's going to be at least 100, right? Well, after my diagnosis, I revisited this and I thought, hey, Ray, if you want to be, truthful with yourself and truly introspective, and give this exercise its full due, yeah, your tick mark there where you are on your timeline is probably much further to the right than you may have originally thought, right? So I wanted to sit back and think on that. What does that mean to you? Well, I mean, for me, it was like, well, there's a lot of things I want to get accomplished. And I think I take time for granted. And that I'm not the only person out there, Carol, that does that. But when I was reflecting back on my life journey up to that point in time, I recognized the fact that I took all tomorrows for granted, next week's, next month, next year. And depending on the topic, Carol, I might take a couple of decades for granted. It was that kind of classic, one day I am going to ... right? And so I thought, wow, I take time for granted. I need to stop taking time for granted because there's things I want to do. And then I wanted to think a little bit more on it. And I thought, well, how does taking time for granted, how has it manifested itself in my life? And once I was able to articulate in my mind that I was taking time for granted, I thought, you know what? I take people and relationships for granted because I take time for granted. If I'm thinking about my dear friend, Carol, I'm like, I could reach out to her today, but I'll just reach out to her tomorrow because Carol's going to be here tomorrow and I'll be here tomorrow. Okay, maybe next week. And, and I just, kind of let, things go. And so I was taking people and relationships for granted. And so that was a powerful moment for me, is being able to articulate in my mind, don't take things for granted and don't take people for granted. What do I want to get accomplished in the time that I have? What do I want to do? What matters most to me and who matters most to me? So let's do the things that are most important to me with the people that I love and enjoy the most. And as a musician, I'm always looking for a little saying to put on the back of a t-shirt so we can make more money at gigs. Logo on the front, pithy little saying in the back. And that led to a motto that I kind of adopted, and it was, if not now, when? And that was about getting things done. And over time, if not now, when, has morphed into another one, and that's punch today in the face. If today could be personified, I want to get today's attention. I want to use today up, Carol. I want to, at the end of the day, when I'm laying in bed going to sleep, I want to sit back and like, wow, I got the most out of today. Today is a gift, people, and not everyone got to receive that gift. So how do we honor those people? How do we honor ourselves? And how do we honor the day? So, go out there and make the most of this gift of the day that you have, folks. For me, those, if not now, when, and punch it in the face, it's kind of inspirational, motivational to me to get off my rear, do those things that are most important with me, to the people I love and enjoy the most. That way at night, I can sit back and say I got the most out of the day. I have a sense of inner peace, tranquility, calm, satisfaction. Those are all great things, right? So I use those as little motivators for myself.
Did your career halt during this time?
Yes and no. I worked through it. I think, a big stumbling block for my career at the time was the pandemic in 2020. I was involved in the retail analytics business, analytics for brick and mortar stores. And we were definitely not going to grow during the pandemic because our customers weren't going to grow. So I had to leave that job. I've worked with another couple of SaaS companies since then. Right now, I've decided to go I'm 61 years old, winding down my career. I think I work as a freelancer now. I think, if treatment makes me in a way unemployable full time. I am in treatment currently in my current regimen. I'm at the infusion center 3 weeks out of 4. And I'm at the infusion center for a good half a day. And then afterwards, I don't feel particularly well, and I don't feel particularly well the very next day either. Right. So it's kind of, unfair, I think, at this point in time in my current treatment plan to work full time for others. If my treatment plan changes, I'd like to change that a little bit. I would like to work another couple of years. I don't think I can afford to retire right now. But we're giving it our best shot.
And what about your books?
Well, they derive partly from If Not Now, When. There's a dear friend of mine. His name's Tom Olenek, and he's a Yinzer. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, that's somebody from Pittsburgh. And Tom's the same age as me, and Tom, lived through a very difficult time in Pittsburgh. It was a deindustrialization transformation in the 70s and 80s. As the domestic steel industry was kind of going away, that entire city, its entire legacy up to that point in time, was revolved around first iron, then second steel. And as they were, going through this deindustrialization transformation, very painful. But it was a similar experience to their Rust Belt cousins like Detroit and Buffalo and Cleveland and Akron and Gary, Indiana, and the like. And at the end of this deindustrialization transformation, Pittsburgh came out really kind of smelling like a rose. They were a new economy success story. Well, yet the other cities, even today, continue to struggle. And Tom had this thesis in his head, is that, what made Pittsburgh different? And that was, well, when the going got tough in Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh had ready-made heroes and role models. And that was their professional football team, the Pittsburgh Steelers, which up to 1972 had not been a very good football team at all. Then all of a sudden, they were an excellent football team. They were the NFL's first Super Bowl era dynasty. So Tom had this thesis in his mind that the Steelers helped save Pittsburgh. And he talked about it for 20 some odd years to his friends. For me, he talked about it for 10 to 15 years until one day in 2020, I just, grabbed him by the shoulders and kind of shook him a little bit and said, Tom, if not now, when? I mean, we're talking about something that happened, almost 50 years ago. Let's write this book. You keep saying it's going to be this great book, and let's get started on it at least, and if we should ever veer off of your vision, we could course correct. Well, sure enough, Carol, 18 months later, we hadn't veered off his vision, and we had a book that I'm super proud of. The first book that I wrote, co-wrote with Tom. It's called Immaculate: How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. And I'm super proud of that book. And, the genesis of that book really was Tom's thesis, Tom's idea, combined with me and my at the time fresh cancer diagnosis, where it's like, if not now, when? Let's get that done.
Right.
So that was my first book, and then with the success of that book, I wanted to do a myeloma book because I had so many people help me when I was originally diagnosed. I went to my first ever group. I went about 2 weeks after I was diagnosed. And it was a general cancer patient support group. So not just multiple myeloma, but all sorts of patients. And those people, helped me, learn how to become a cancer patient and how to deal with so many things. And, when I needed a helping hand, Carol, they reached out and pulled me forward. And that was part of my growth, as an individual. It's like, I want to be one of those people. When I'm feeling good and I'm feeling strong and I'm feeling capable and I can provide a helping hand to somebody to pull them forward when they need to be pulled forward, that's the person I want to be. That's what I want my legacy to be. So I thought, how could I do that? I was blessed because of, being a musician and some other things that, I had once I got diagnosed, I was the subject of some interviews, both video and written interviews. And because of those interviews, people, kept, reaching out to me via social media platforms, just asking me questions and the like about my treatment. They were patients themselves or caregivers or allies. And, it was a one-to-one type of engagement. And so I thought to myself, how can I scale that from one-to-one to one-to-many? I thought, well, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book to be a resource for the community. And so that's my second book. It's called Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. It's intended to be, it tells my story, but I want it to be a resource for patients and their caregivers and their allies. And it was really important for me to make this book, from the community to the community, and somehow, for the community to benefit other than just the words on the page. So, I'm very proud of the fact that my net writers' proceeds for that book, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma, they're donated to the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. Hopefully we're driving toward advanced treatments and maybe one day a cure for this disease. So another book that I'm proud of, but it was a book that was really, the impetus came from, wanting to be like these brave cancer warriors that I know that, showed me how to be a patient. They helped me in my time of need. And, it's been, Carol, probably the most rewarding experience of my life, other than, being a father to two great children and a husband to a great spouse, is connecting with patients and their caregivers around the world. Through the book, I've had conversations with patients from New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, the United Kingdom, and of course, throughout the United States. And it's like I said, it's been the most rewarding experience. A podcast host a few months ago asked me, would you change your diagnosis? And it was a really,
wow, that's a good question.
It was a tough question and she caught me by surprise. So, for once in my life, I was kind of speechless for a moment. But then, facing the pressure of being on the podcast and having to come up with an answer, I thought, you know what? I don't want to have cancer. But no, my first, when you ask that question, my first, instinct from my heart, I was like, you know what? I wouldn't change it. That diagnosis has led to a lot of individual growth for myself. I'm a much more, I have a much higher emotional quotient, EQ, and emotional intelligence at this point in time. I'm much more understanding. I'm much more empathetic. And these experiences I've had with the multiple myeloma community, the cancer community, the serious health concern community, and their caregivers has been, some of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And it's an honor to do it. So yeah, difficult answer, difficult for me to actually kind of admit that. But I don't think I'd change it because of the growth that I've experienced as a person. Yeah. Now it's interesting. When I was first diagnosed, I was reading a lot. And in one of the books I read, they talked about, for some people, their diagnosis with a serious illness, they look back at it as the best day of their life, because it changed the direction of their life.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm not exactly there yet. I'm not quite ready to say that March 11th, 2019 was the best day of my life, but it did change my life, and it changed it, differently. And, as it relates to change, a lot of times patients view their illnesses as, from the lens of what has it taken away from me? And that's understandable, right? For me, because I'm kind of tethered to a treatment center, my ability to travel for a long period of time is compromised. I can't do that. But at the same time, on March 10th, 2019, Carol, I was a husband, father, employee, a boss, a bandmate, a teammate, uncle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I had all these roles in my life. And each one of those roles had some accountabilities and objectives that I wanted to achieve. And you know what? On March 11th, I had those exact same roles, Carol. I was still a husband, a father, a bandmate, a teammate, a boss, an employee, et cetera. nothing had really changed in that respect. And over time, very quickly, I became a cancer patient fundraiser, cancer patient advocate. I added these other roles, and with those roles came new accountabilities and new goals and objectives. So yeah, cancer has taken away, but cancer has also provideth and giveth to me. And now I, with the advocacy work that I do, like I said, it's an honor, it's a privilege. I'm grateful.
And what is a word of encouragement, advice, whatever you want to call it, for anyone who might be experiencing this or something else in their life?
Well,
that-
I love the format of what you do, Carol, and it's like never giving up hope. And we all have there's like no wrong answer like with that.
Right.
If a person going forward, even giving up hope, for some people that might be right for them. It's their it's their individual right and their choice. But the advice I like to give folks is live for that day. We all have an uncertain future, and tomorrow's not promised for anybody. And you may already have been diagnosed with something and it's changed your life, but everybody gets something, right? It's
Right.
the human condition is that we're all terminally ill with at some respect. We have finite lives on this planet, right? And I'd like to reinforce that message of today. And this day is a gift. What are you going to do today? Let's not worry. Don't get too far ahead of your skis. Let's not worry that much about tomorrow. There are some things that we can think about for tomorrow, but what are you going to do today, right? And then you're not in this alone. That's what I like to tell other people too. Reach out and if you need some help, if I can help you out there, audience, in any way whatsoever, please reach out to me. You can get me at any social media platform with my name, Ray Hartjen. You can reach me at my website, rayhartjen.com. My email address is rayhartjen@gmail.com. If I can do anything for you, please reach out to me. And if you need help, recognize that within yourself and try to find those resources available to you, because you don't need to go through this alone. And people have been in your shoes before you, that they can help you. For me, it was, that very first group I went to, and these people who, they were pioneers in the way. They had blazed a trail for me to follow. And, that in turn has led me to want to continue that work of theirs and blaze a trail for those that follow me.
Well, that is certainly a word of encouragement and also a summary. And is there anything else that you would like to add as to summarize, or anything else that possibly you did not share already that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I shared, I think, the most important thing first. If you're feeling like $1 million and super healthy, that doesn't mean you can't go see your doctor at least once a year and get a routine blood test. So go see your doctor, folks. Live, appreciate the day as much as you can. Sometimes, in group, there's some people, cancer treatments can be very fatiguing. And you just don't have that.
Wow.
You just like, wow, I don't have the energy to clean my house. Sometimes you need to reframe, right? And it's like, don't worry about cleaning your house. How about let's just get started on the dining room table today or whatever. And, reframe your objectives. You might not end today with a clean house, but you might end today with a clean dining room. And that's a start. Celebrate this. Yeah, celebrate the starts.
Right.
You don't get caught up with like, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to finish this. We'll worry about, continuing tomorrow. Today, let's just get started, so celebrate the starts, take advantage of the day that you have, know that you're loved. And when you need help, reach out. And likewise, if you don't need help, but you see others that need help, reach out and help them, pull them forward as they need it.
I love that. Celebrate the starts and take advantage of the day you have. That's incredible advice.
Mm-hmm.
And I thank you, Ray, for being on Never Ever Give Up Hope today. I thank you for the encouragement to the audience. Thank you for sharing your story. And of course, all the links will be available, including the links to your books, etc. And I wish you the best. And I thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Carol. I want to thank you for what you do for your community. It's important, and may you be in good health and do it for a long, long, long time to come. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.
Feeling stuck in your prayer life? You're not alone. Join Pray the Answer, a free weekly webinar led by prayer coach Carol Graham. Each session will help you shift from fear to faith and from worry to worship. Learn how to pray God's word and receive real answers. Visit prayingmiracles.com to register today.